We are honored to have Dr. Paula Kohler rejoin us today as our keynote speaker. Many of you work with her as she helped your institution actually establish an approved FPCTP. We found it fitting for no one other than she who could bring the perspective she brings today as we declare and celebrate 5 years of the FPCTP Act and reflect the amazing transformations that have occurred since 2016. Now retired, Dr. Paula Kohler was founding executive director for the Florida Center for Students with Unique Abilities, FCSUA as you know it, and professor of exceptional student education at the University of Central Florida here. And so as we think about it, Dr. Kohler led FCSUA's work to establish and support Florida post-secondary comprehensive transition programs in public and private universities, state and community colleges, and technical colleges across the state. She also served as co-director of the National Technical Assistance on Transition, NTAC, funded by the U.S. Department of Education, and is an emeritus professor of Western Michigan University, from where she retired as Associate Vice President for Research. Dr. Kohler conducted research regarding effective transition education and services for youth with disabilities across a range of topics, including college and career readiness. She accomplished this work with support from the U.S. Department of Education, the National Science Foundation, and State Departments of Education. Her taxonomy for transition programming and taxonomy 2.2 are recognized as an effective model for planning, implementing, and evaluating transition-focused education, and has influenced the implementation of transition education across the United States and other countries. The taxonomy provides a heuristic for organizing the evidence-based and promising practices at the core of NTAC's work and at the core of our work. Dr. Kohler has a background in business administration, educational leadership, career and technical education, and exceptional student education. In 2001, 2006, and 2016, Dr. Kohler was recognized for her work by the Council for Exceptional Children's Division on Career Development and Transition, Western Michigan College of Education, and the Association of Career and Technical Education Research. Dr. Kohler also received the Excellence in Research in Practice Award in recognition of work with the taxonomy from the Research Use Special Interest Group of the American Educational Research Association at the 2017 annual meeting. This award celebrates exemplary performance moving research into the field of educational practice. In October of 2018, University of Central Florida recognized Dr. Kohler with a Luminary Award, which honors faculty members across all disciplines for being academic leaders in their field and conducting work that has a significant impact on the world. Everyone, please welcome Dr. Paula Kohler.
Oh my gosh, I wish we were in person. Okay, so is my you're screen sharing? Okay, yes, good. So then we want from the beginning. Okay. So can you see my screen? All right, fantastic. Thank you guys for having me. I so wish we were in person because I miss you all. And there's all these new people that have become involved in this whole movement and this whole initiative since a year ago when I left. And what a year you've had. I just can't imagine the challenges that COVID has brought to everyone's campus and the struggle to continue providing that face-to-face education. So they did ask me to talk about some of the things that have happened in the last 5 years. And you're gonna have to excuse me because I'm gonna reiterate a little bit of what Janice talked about regarding the Florida Post-Secondary Comprehensive Transition Program Act and really the opportunities that provided us, as well as the challenges that it presented us with. Because I look, at the list of people who are involved, and I see Katie from the Keys, and I see Gwen and Mike from FAU, and we have Mary Lou, is an expat from FAU on, and Andrew at UCF, Lyman at USF, and of course all our facilitators. Linda Misillo up at Santa Fe. You all have been the troop that have been in the trenches for these last 5 years, and it's fantastic to see you. And then of course our whole cohort of facilitators and resources like Chris and Jeannie and Gwen and Bea and Patrick, people from around the state that have been engaged in transition education. And then of course my colleagues Alicia and June from previously Western Michigan University, and the leadership that they've helped provide regarding evaluation and other aspects of our planning. So we're going to talk about the engagement that many of you have experienced these last 5 years, and then what those challenges are for the future, because you know me, I'm going to talk a little bit about data, and of course the data always presents challenges to us. We don't want to go out of business. We continue to have challenges. And then there should hopefully be a couple of minutes for some questions and answers. So again, Janice talked about the acts, but when you look at the purpose, it really emphasized certain things like independent living, post-secondary education, employment opportunities, statewide coordination. So they laid out this purpose in this legislation that took 2 years to become law. Well, years of work and then 2 years of hearings before it became law, that really looked at what the heck are we trying to do and what do we want to make available for our students here in Florida. And the emphasis was on making sure that students have access to meaningful post-secondary education credentials and that they have meaningful campus experiences. So the whole, I guess, the whole hypothesis of this legislation was to let's bring kids in and move them up to post-secondary education, give them a real quality education so that they achieve real quality employment and are more able to live successful independent lives. So we're going to look at those things and what this law required in order to achieve those purposes that it spelled out. So one of the very first things it did was establish the Florida Center for Students with Unique Abilities at UCF. And then it defined these things that we call FPCTPs, those Florida post-secondary programs. You know, there are programs emerging around the country and work had been done at the federal level, but this brought it specifically to Florida and said, well, this is what we expect of someone or an IHE that's going to have access to the significant resources that we're going to provide for this effort. So this is what it has to be. And then part of those resources were that they have provided and continue to provide scholarship funding for students to attend those Florida approved programs, and also funded grants, both startup and enhancement grants, so that institutions of higher ed could take the plunge where they might not have gone before, to look at, well, how do we start a program like this? What do we need to do? Lots of questions emerge from that. So, you know, one of the very first things was, how do you establish such a center at UCF? Where's the space to put the center? Where are the resources to support the center? Who's in charge? Who does what? Then all those crazy questions that you all went through or are going through now to establish your programs. We had to do the same thing here at the center, because no such center existed in the United States. We didn't have a model on which to build. And then once we figured out, okay, well, we're a center. We live here. We're in the teaching academy at UCF. Now, how do we get people to become programs? How do we get institutions of higher education to really take that leap of faith that these programs will be recognized and valued and successful on their campuses. So we had to establish a way for people to apply to become a program, and then an actual approval process. So how do we review these applications? What are the criteria that we use to review these applications? And then once me as the executive director, or I as the executive director, would find that someone had an acceptable program as presented in their application, how do we move that on up through the state ladder, so to speak, for their state approval? And that approval came from different places, depending on the kind of institution that you were. And again, those were things that were spelled out in the legislation itself. And then in order to get these funds available to IHEs to start or to develop their programs, how do you establish a grant application process? How do you review those applications? What's an application need to look like? What's a budget need to look like? And then how are we going to track the expenditures and actually move the money from UCF to the institutions of higher ed? And it's interesting because I think about all the types of institutions that have applied for these grants and actually have been supported with these funds. And they're so very different. So if I look at a UCF or I look at an FAU, then those institutions have offices for external funding. That's what they do. That's what they're used to doing. They're familiar with a submission and award process and tracking grant funding and expenditures and meeting the accountability requirements. But when I look at, say, some of the state colleges or some of the tech colleges, then that's it's in a different world. And it might be much more localized. So I think about Vivian and Ada, they're working in Robert Morgan, and their external funding department is with the Miami Department, Miami-Dade County Department of Education. So, and they're so distantly placed, say, from the folks at Robert Morgan. So when we're in a university, and in my role as Associate VP for Research, that's what I did. And so I'm familiar with how the universities work and how these things work. Money flows and reporting flows back. Then in some of the cases where IHEs were working with their grants or their grant offices to make these things happen, there were some definite challenges there. The same thing with the scholarship application. So when I think about, gosh, this is great. We've got funds to provide scholarships for these students to attend these approved programs. Gosh, that's so simple. We move the money to the institution. They set up a scholarship process for their students, and away we go. Well, that's because initial mistake of mine was to think that there's a standard scholarship process. And boy, when we started rolling this out, I can honestly say that was not the case. So when I think about UCF coming back and saying, well, our students are only going to get this amount of your total that you provided. And I'm going, no, the legislation says they get the total provided. And they're going, no, but they didn't spend that much money at UCF. And so all the work it took to get them to understand that this is a flat rate scholarship. It goes to your students. You can apply the charges of the program to the scholarships, but what's left over needs to help support all the other things that students have to do. Perhaps pay for housing, perhaps pay for transportation, perhaps pay for laptops and those kinds of things, meals when they're on campus taking their courses. So there are many more costs to going to higher education or going to post-secondary education other than what gets charged at the bookstore or in tuition. So how do we get these systems to work that? And I keep thinking of Roger down at in Broward County at, oh my gosh, at McFadden, was he at McFadden? And, you know, he was so good in understanding financial aid. And I think he served as a resource for many other financial aid offices that had to figure out how do we use these funds? How do we get these funds? How do we use them? And are we accountable for them? Accountability was a huge charge for us, both at the center level and then flowing down to the programs. So that we had to establish accountability systems and then report results annually to basically all of Tallahassee. That's what I used to say, from the governor down. And then we were also charged to conduct outreach to and collaborate with K-12 systems, parents, relevant service agencies. Certainly VR is a very important agency. DD services providers are very important agencies. The Department of Education, the Board of Governors. And when you think about it, this outreach was as important as establishing all these other systems that we had to establish, because so many times they didn't know anything about what we were talking about. What do you mean college programs for students with intellectual disabilities? How does this affect our accreditation? And I don't know that we're supposed to approve these. And I guess Southeastern University can think back when they submitted their application originally, and I'm sending it up to Tallahassee to get approved. And the people in Tallahassee says, well, I don't know anything about this. And I'm supposed to approve this? Where does it say that? So there are lots of figuring things out, which were challenging, but rewarding. So of course we had to hire staff, just like you've had to hire staff. We've had to talk to the IHEs, particularly about the president and the board of trustee requirements. So you know your programs, and if you're developing a program, then your CEO, your president, your superintendent, whatever institutional governance exists in your setting, has to support this application to become a Florida Post-Secondary Comprehensive Transition Program, and that your application, your program, has to be approved by your governing board, and that might be a board of trustees or school board. And so again, them recognizing what are these programs, why do I have to do this, do we want this? We had to really communicate and reach out through that education leadership network to, again, in essence, help support the IHE program staff to sell their proposed programs to their administration. In many cases, again, we would meet with provost, or we would meet with superintendents, or we would meet with department chairs and accreditation people in particular that would wonder, why would we want to do this? Why do we want a program like this at our institution? So just that whole initial hump of learning, the learning curve about what we're trying to do and what's possible to achieve. And then, of course, as I said, working with those grants offices to figure out how they apply for the funding and then how they manage the funding. So the financial aid offices, that was challenging, but such a learning experience in terms of, again, all the types of financial aid that are available to students and making sure that our students have access to what they're entitled. So again, I can remember going up and meeting with the accreditation folks from all the institutions, all the universities and other institutions in the state, public safety. Why would we have these kids on campus? Isn't that going to be a liability for campus? And explaining to them they have no more worse behaviors than any other students on your campus. So working through those state offices, and I will have to say that although it was challenging, that the support we got from the state was tremendous. So whenever they were bringing together groups of their, oh gosh, what would you call them? They're groups of their colleagues focused on a particular area. Maybe it was accessibility programs. They would invite us and we would do sessions over and over there and again. And I can tell Drew became a gold flyer in our initial work with the center because of the outreach that we engaged in. We worked so closely with the Senate Budget Office to advocate for continued funding. And I can tell you, I don't think that we had a stronger supporter in support of what you all are doing than that of the Senate budget leadership. So again, I kudos to them and thanks for either holding our hand or waving our flag or all the things that they've done to keep these funds available both to students and both to the institutions. We had to establish reporting platforms and procedures so that we could hear back from you and meet the accountability requirements of the legislation. So when I think about that, you know, big challenges, oh, you know me, I'm a researcher. I have all kinds of questions. I want you to send me all kinds of data because that's how we learn things. And that's how we improve things, but we had to try to keep your reporting burden as low as possible. So what information are we required to get, and then what information will enhance our actions as we go forward without creating a burden in the reporting process. And then how do we actually make this stuff come together? How do we help you plan? How do we develop a planning system through which to apply evidence-based and promising practices? So what knowledge do we bring to this that we want to see flow down into program development through a planning process, a planning system? So again, I shout out to June and my colleagues that I've worked with over the years that really understand the research and the system that we've created through which we can apply that research, move it to practice. And that's what we've been recognized for. And then when I think about the institutions, it wasn't just the center that faced challenges as we geared up to implement this law. What the heck are you all talking about? What is this? What is it? How do we pay for it? How do we sustain it in our institutions? And higher education has not had an easy time over the past 10 years in Florida, I would say. Been lots of mandates, lots of oversight, lots of budget cuts, and a lot of craziness. And so as we were asking institutions to develop new programs to serve students that they're not necessarily sure belong in post-secondary education, there's a lot at stake as they move forward in doing this and the challenges that you all have faced. So as Janice pointed out earlier, that the legislation requires them to report on employment outcomes, providing their programs in inclusive context. And kids can attend well, I shouldn't say kids, we've had students up into their 40s, but they have to attend no less than half time as defined by the institution. And they have to provide a meaningful credential, presumably aligned with industry certifications. Another big challenge and required in the legislation was defining satisfactory academic progress, SAP. So many times we would go out and people would ask, what is SAP? Or you'd meet with the accreditation folks or the institutional data folks, and they'll say, well, this is SAP and it's very important. We cannot stray from this because our students must meet SAP or they are not continuously eligible for their financial aid that they receive. So what does that look like for a non-traditional type program? The institutions also had to file to become federal comprehensive transition programs. What did that look like and how the heck did that even happen? Because it happens through the financial aid offices. It goes along with this whole issue of SAP, and it's a process that at times seems so overwhelming for many of our initial programs that they were ready to throw their hands up. So I appreciate your struggles with that. And the fact that you are interfacing with folks on the other end that approve the federal CTPs that really didn't know what was happening at the university or at the institution. And I can give you an example. I know Katie and I can't remember all the names of people at the Keys, but we had to sort of negotiate back and forth with the feds on their CTP application because they just couldn't believe that the Keys students actually had access to degrees. Really? Of course they do, because that's how the program in Florida and the College of the Florida Keys was established. But getting them to understand how some of our programs are different from others that they might have approved around the country was challenging. And then, of course, the reporting requirements. Many of these programs, as you know, started out with 1 person, 2 persons, limited staff. And if you look at our annual report, you can look at the staffing patterns across all the approved programs. Some have many staff, some have 2 staff. And it's up to those staff to do everything from teaching, from recruiting, enrolling, advising, teaching, supporting, and reporting. So I know I want to recognize the challenges that, of course, our pioneer programs rose to meet. And then, of course, now our new emerging programs are also rising to meet. So some of the questions that were really fore and center to this whole notion of program development, really they coalesced around credentials. And so things like, in what cases can earning a credential qualify a student to access new opportunities to continue education? Okay, you leave school, you might stay in K-12 service domain until you were 22 in a young adult program sponsored by the district. But now we're saying that they have opportunities to go on to post-secondary education and actually earn a credential, a recognizable credential, that's going to give them a different pathway to employment. So how do we resolve this? This isn't what's been typically done in the past, and it's opening up new pathways. What does that credential or should that credential qualify a student to do? How can an institution ensure it's maintaining rigor if it has a different definition of SAP for this group of students? Is that allowable? Is that wise? Is it not wise? Many institutions struggle with that, and I know still struggle with SAP because it becomes a very important data point regarding student enrollment. And then again, the question regarding, is it acceptable to add a credential that can be pursued only by a subset of individuals? And that would be credentials that are established for students specifically enrolled in that Florida Post-Secondary Comprehensive Transition Program. Is that even right? These are the questions that I know hopefully some of you are shaking your heads that yes, we have to deal with that. Or yes, we're still dealing with that. Or yes, we haven't figured that out yet. Where and how does such a credential fit in the university, for example? What do these credentials look like? Do we need more than one? Should we have micro credentials? What essential elements should we include in our credential so that we're sure that we're accredited? Who accredits us? What do you mean we have to send a letter notifying our accreditation agency that we've become a Florida approved program? And do they have to approve it? No, we're letting them know we've added a new program and they are become a part of our accountability at the institution. Many people struggle with that concept. How does a credential differ from a degree? And how does an institution that traditionally offers only degrees to undergraduates go about developing a credential? And I know the folks at UCF struggled with this because in higher education in Florida, credentials might be applied post-bac, but the only way you earn a specific credential through an undergrad program is through another major. So that became a real sort of sticking point of, or are we not contradicting our higher education rules that focus on degrees at the undergraduate level? So again, what credential, what curriculum, what's the scope and sequence of the curriculum? Is it all special courses? Are there courses that happen in other parts of the institution? Are they integrated? Are they inclusive? Remember, inclusive programs. Where does it live? Where does this program live? And I look across all the institutions with approved programs, it lives in many different places. College of Education, the industrial arts programs, student services. And that's the question that each institution had to answer and sometimes has to evaluate. Does it live in the right place? Who does what? Whom do we serve? How do we recruit students to our program? We're getting money, we've got scholarships, we need students. And I know that's been a struggle in some cases. Other questions, how do you build a program development and implementation team? Who's on that? Who in the university should be in this? And I remember meeting with, I think up at Tallahassee Community College, and again, another university, and it was so fantastic because they have accreditation, student services, the provost, a department chair, and another, I think I said accreditation, people that were here to meet with us as they planned their program and address questions like, who is it? What is the credential? How are they going to be advised, and all these various things. So that those teams, when you have a person over here, an advocate for establishing a program, because it didn't always come from the top. Here's a program, here's a person who's passionate about the program. They've been working with the secondary students. Now we want to move this into post-secondary. Okay, how do I add to my N of one with the people within this institution that can make this happen, and through which this has to happen? Other questions like, do faculty play nice with these students in their classes? I'm sure there are many faculty that were resistant to watering down the knowledge base of their classes, perhaps. And then a big question we often face when we would go to meetings around the state would be, what kind of trouble can these students get into on the campus? Is this going to be become a liability for campus if we allow students with intellectual disabilities here? Well, you know what? Those were challenges, but together we built it. And when I think, first there were 0, then there were 4, then there were 8, and now there are 19 programs on 24 campuses. And that's phenomenal. There are programs at 6 universities, 6 state colleges, and 7 tech colleges. That is phenomenal. There's no other state that has done what this state has done. Look, from the Panhandle all the way to the Keys. That's amazing. So what we've done really, what you've done over the past 5 years, is to demonstrate that they can be established in a variety of IHEs. And that map just it demonstrates that, from having 2 career tech programs to having students accessing other academic programs or other tech programs, a broad array of tech programs like that at the College of the Florida Keys. It's amazing. And I think, Janice, what did you mention? 330 credentials. 330 credentials have been developed and or applied to provide a post-secondary pathway to employment. So it's been very creative out there, I will say, folks, regarding credentials. And they go from very specific credentials. And I love, if you all remember to go to the appendix H in your annual reports, because we know you read your annual reports, that important reporting requirement, that if you go to appendix H, you can see the various credentials. And we've, just our initial discussions about credentials were so amazing, really, when you think about it. So I'm looking at Drew as I say that, because, again, what we had to say was, how do you even talk about this? How do you talk about what a student exits with if they complete your program, and what does that mean, or what does that indicate? So when we look at how, and just getting being able to ask you the right question about that during your application process and during your reporting process, it was a learning curve. So, you know, you look at ACI at FAU, and they have the supported community employment credential. And that's something that if you pass their program, if you complete their program, that's what you get. Well, what does that mean to an employment office, to someone in business or industry that's looking to hire your students? Okay, well, this is what it means. These are the skills and these are the knowledge that our students are leaving with. A number of you have moved on to develop micro credentials so that you can actually, on a transcript, demonstrate what the knowledge and skills that the students have earned through the program. A transcript, that was another huge challenge. And so again, I'm going to challenge you all. It's accomplishment, but it was a challenge in terms of, well, how is this or this program and these courses and the earning of this credential reflected in the institution's transcript that they issue to students that show their success? How did that happen? It was through much discussion and negotiation, I know, in many places. And when you think about it, these programs now have been sustained across these 5 years. So the access to resources, and they've continued to sustain and support students in the programs. Other things that we've seen is this whole focus on peer mentors. And it was interesting that I think it was FAU and Carrie that worked with, wasn't it Carrie? No, Gwen, I'm sorry, Gwen Carrie is her last name. And worked and reached out to looking at, well, how do we become actually a certified peer mentor program so that we really have some meat behind our peer mentoring, our selection of peer mentors and the services that they provide to students. And so we looked at that, and there were, 1, 2, then 3 programs that used peer mentors. And now it's as if I think all the programs are using peer mentors. So that's, these students at your institutions turn out to be very valuable resources to support your students. And again, we looked at how you've expanded, and I'm taking some of this information from your team planning tool that Janice mentioned, that here we love, and many of you curse me for, but it's a very powerful tool. It's been shown to be so over and over again. But anyway, this is something that people point out. So now we have academic advising, we have academic instructors, we have financial aid, we have residential services, we have career services. All these units on our campus are working to support our students. So part of what was initially the responsibility of just the program staff now has become the responsibility across campus. So that is a huge accomplishment, when initially you had campuses wondering, why do we want this program? Or why should we have this program? Hundreds of students have enrolled now, 169 alone in 2021. 133 students have completed their programs. And at the time of the annual reporting this year, 78 students are employed. Some have previously been employed, and I think because of COVID, were in between employment, as were many other Americans. Student enrollment has been and continues to be supported by the FTPCT scholarships. Program development has been and continues to be supported by the program grants. And what amazes me as I look at all of you attending here is an incredible network of program directors and staff with expertise regarding serving students with intellectual disability and post-secondary education has emerged. And any other state can look now to Florida and say, I can go to one of 19 programs and find out how they're doing this in all these different contexts. And it's amazing the competence that you, program directors and your staff, demonstrate in establishing and implementing these programs and in serving students directly. Phenomenal. So when I think about the ACT, then again, I think about what it charged us with. So the curriculum that you've established across these programs includes a focus on independent living. So what are the skills? How do we bring students into our dorms or to support residential experiences on campus so they become more skilled and more able to live independently? You provide inclusive and experiential post-secondary education. There's no doubt about that. When you look at the kinds of things that students are involved in on their campuses, they're involved in through and with their peer mentors. They're working either in paid jobs or non-paid jobs. I know UCF had a student that ran for student government. Your students are joining clubs and becoming engaged in their campuses, and they have access to employment opportunities. And that's evidenced by those students who have attained and maintained employment since their program completion. IHEs have developed meaningful post-secondary credentials, 300 plus of them. It's amazing. And providing meaningful campus experiences. So, so again, I think we've met the requirements of the ACT, but I think at the same time, we still have work to do. The challenges have not gone away. But when I look again at your program planning tools that you engage with on an ongoing basis, because planning is not a one and done, it's a continuous improvement process, as Janice described, that you have established and or expanded your partnerships. And this is what, these are things that when I look down the list of needs that you had identified previously, when I look into the strength column now, these show up as strengths. These were once needs as you were thinking about your programs, developing your programs, implementing your programs. And because of that persistence and continuous program improvement, we've seen them become strengths. Increased partnerships both through the K-12 system, certainly through VR, there's absolutely no doubt about that. And then other community agencies that are relevant for your students. Partnerships within the universities or within the institutions and outside of them in the community. Faculty engagement has increased. That's good. So for where once we may have had a unique program staff serving and instructing students, we see students engaged in other courses on campus and in other colleges, so to speak, so that faculty engagement has grown and students have access to more faculty and more instruction. Hard as it was, admission, orientation, registration, and matriculation processes have been established at institutions. And it's great when I read those barriers that have been overcome, and these are now strengths. So when you see these as strengths, these are the people that you go out to. So these are resources. So others around the country can use our programs as resources. Other emerging programs in Florida can look to these programs and say, how the heck did you do that? Realignment of staff roles. So I know one of the things that Santa Fe and UCF focused on after maybe a couple of years of implementation was a recognition that they needed job placement staff. They really needed to have staff that were helping students either get jobs, paid, unpaid, during their program and then upon program completion. So to really cross that line to employment, they needed to shift or realign staff roles with those needs. And that now we've seen that these programs are aligned, and it's recognized that they're aligned with the institution's mission. So that is a huge, when we initially had people asking, why would we do these programs? And now you see that they are aligned right in stock with the institution's mission. That's phenomenal. Work we still have to do. So I also look at the needs that remain or that emerge as you go on. And these were some of the needs that were identified as top priorities during planning. So when you identify your priorities during your planning process, you choose 1, 2, or 3. Well, these needs listed had at least a rating of a 2.67. So these were high priorities, or these needs became high priorities as you were moving ahead. So again, looking at policies and procedures, we've got to have and make sure that these are clear to students, to faculty, to advisors, to other students of how the program works. So we're not all flying by the seat of our pants. And we knew that once we established our policies and procedures here for the center, then it became much easier to communicate with program developers and to move forward with our charges. A meaningful credential that leads to employment. So I think people are still looking at their many credentials that they may have established and thinking, what is the relationship and what is the likelihood that this particular credential leads to employment? And we'll look at employment outcomes in just a minute, but so that is a question that has to continuously be asked. And, again, I talked, I like data. So as I'm reading and reviewing these things again, I'm thinking, oh man, we need to do a study on that. So when we look at the credentials, many are not aligned or associated with a specific industry credential, and many are. And so, one of the important questions to me would be, okay, what's the association between credential and employment? Is it best to be an industry for that credential to include an industry certification, or does it not matter? But those are the questions that I would reflect on, and that I would certainly encourage others to reflect on as you think about your needs. Work experiences. That, again, was a high priority for a number of those engaged in planning. So it occurred, when you go through the planning tool, you're looking at those 4 areas: students, faculty, program, and institution. So one of the needs over and over was getting students engaged in work experiences on and off campus. And then at the program level, provision of a range of work experiences on and off campus. So that need showed up both for individual students and then at the program level. Of course, they go hand in hand. So, we can't forget that one of the strongest predictors of post-school success for students with disabilities is paid work experience. So, and that's again our focus on evidence-based and promising practices. So the importance of work experiences continues to emerge over and over in transition-related studies. So we like to move this off the need into the strength area, but we still have a lot of work to do. And it's the same with the development and application of student self-determination skills. And I know part of what we hear from post-secondary programs as well, excuse me, is that students come to us without these skills, and they expect people to do for them. And what we're trying to do through these programs, again, is for students to do it for themselves. And, creating that self-determination, awareness, knowledge, and skills is critical to their post-school success, because this, again, is an important indicator aligned with post-school success in employment, independent living, and post-secondary education. And then again, the whole notion of sufficient personnel and resources. And if you look in your, of course, the annual report, then I think it's Appendix J goes into all the kinds of staffing used at each institution, FTEs associated with students. And there's just such a range of ways of staffing and resource provision that go across these programs. So basically, do we need more personnel providing work experience? Do we need more faculty engagement to provide that, to serve as instructional resources rather than staff, program staff? So these are, again, are questions to look at. How are you doing it? And then what's the association with these staffing patterns and success? Program completion and employment, two very distinct measures of success. Okay, we still have work to do because I think about each year and working with all the programs initially, and I know like Santa Fe started with 5 students and then they grew to 10 students, and I think now they're at 15 students. So you see progression across some of these programs, but also see no progression across some programs. So how do we, how can we increase the number of students served? Universities right now, we have 78 students. Now we have a couple of university programs or 3 university programs that have large number, that are serving large number of students, 30 something, almost 20. And I can't remember how many we have down at FIU now, a relatively new program. State colleges are serving 62 students and tech colleges are serving 29 students. When we look at your catchment area projections, which is required, this is a reporting piece required in the legislation, is so varied about how people look at their catchment area. So some programs, institutions look as the state. We can recruit anybody from the state to come into our program. That's their catchment area. Some look at the country. We're recruiting across the country to come into our program. Or others look very specifically within a geographical region or within a particular city, for example, city or county. So the projections range from 14 students to 19,000 students. So my point is, we're serving 169 students right now, right? How can we increase that? We've got work to do to increase the number of students that we're serving. Not saying we have to serve 19,000, but I think the expectation of the legislature and the allocation of resources indicates that we need to grow. Well, here are some specific areas that I think we have work to do in. So we still need to assist families, students, and secondary educators to plan effectively and make good matches between students' goals and an FPCTP. And I can tell you that when I sat in Janice's chair, I got many calls from program staff. I got many calls from parents. And parents feel that students weren't getting enough support, and program staff were crying because they can't provide any more support. And part of that is because, again, looking back to the uniqueness of each of these programs, every single program out there is unique. There's no duplication one to the other. So the challenge is, just like me choosing to go to the University of Florida as an undergraduate, why did I go there? How do you make a match between what a program has to offer, what an institution has to offer through its program, and what are students' goals? So if we do better transition planning at the secondary level, and we're working with parents, and we're making information about our programs available through this work, then hopefully we can say, okay, students who live on the West Coast don't have to go to Lee Technical College. They can go to the Florida Keys, or they can go to Tallahassee. Or students in Central Florida may go to FAU or FIU. They don't need to come to UCF. The idea is, where's the match between my goals as a student and what the program has to offer me? And as we look at one of the sort of surprising outcomes in this year's annual reports from y'all was that a greater number of students are leaving their program without completing. And the most of those who left did not make SAP. So, and then many others or several other students are struggling. So SAP is a really important indicator. And when we first started, we saw very few students not making SAP, more students now. So again, that makes me think, are we making good matches between what the students' goals and support needs are and the program? Or, and I'm sure part of this was COVID. How do you serve students with intellectual disabilities remotely effectively? And I know it's been a challenge, and in many cases it's been successful, but that may be where some of this relationship between this lack of making SIP lies for this past year. But that is a challenge for us to do. We need to increase the diversity of our students. So again, when you look at, I don't have the state data in front of me, but if you look at the state data for students identified with intellectual disabilities, it is not aligned with the students that we are accepting in our programs. So we're still serving 65% of the students that we're serving are white or Caucasian, and 25% are Black or African American. So I think if we looked at what the state data for students with ID, we might find these numbers closer together. And so how do we reach out so that we increase the diversity of the students that we're serving? That's a real important point. We don't want to leave people out because of their ethnicity. We need to increase employment outcomes and opportunities. Did you know I was going to get to this? Universities right now, 55% of their completers were employed. 65% of the completers of the state colleges were employed. And 55% of the completers of the tech colleges were employed. So again, how do we increase completers? And then how do we increase employment of those completers? And again, it's interesting because we want to be able for people to sustain lives, right? Okay, there's one student who's working 3 hours a week and they're making, I can't remember, $8 an hour. So it'd be really hard to anyway, even hardly to contribute to our living cost making $24 a week. Now we had other students that were working, number of students were working 40 hours a week. Number of students, one student was working 45, and then we have many students that are working around 20. So, and their wages range from $8 an hour to $15 an hour. Now, many of those were making around 10, and I assume since the minimum wage in Florida now has gone up to $10, that we'll see more students earning that wage. But again, part of that question is, how do we help students contribute through their employment to their living costs? And we're only going to do that when we get them working more hours. We get more people working, we get them working more hours, and we help them earn higher wages. Excuse me. So when we think, remember I had all those questions that emerged as we were starting up that we had to deal with. What's the credential? Who do we serve? All those things. Well, now, we have a lot of questions that continue to plague us as we think about moving forward. And, really one of the important ones is, what's the secret to employment? And, COVID doesn't help. You apply a contextual factor here that disrupted so many lives and clearly impact the students that we work with as well. But here are some of the things that to me are the things that stand out, again, as we look at the research regarding employment indicators and what's happening. So more effective transition planning during K-12. And clearly that means partnerships with the K-12. That means moving students into our post-secondary programs as age appropriate. Maybe that's 18 and not 22, right? Let's get them going so that they take that pathway to employment that might be more direct than their pathway of staying in a young adult program. And when I think about what Florida International did, was that's what they did. They said we can address employment and post-secondary education and employment outcomes more specifically by creating a post-secondary program rather than continuing a young adult secondary program. So that might be something to think about. And again, thinking about what are those goals? I mean, there are IEP requirements specifically around post-secondary planning. and preparing students for that. So let's reach out more to K-12 and make sure that that transition planning includes outcomes associated with attending post-secondary education and employment. Those have to be specified in their IEP. And I think about our college and career transition clubs. I mean, they did not exist 5 years ago, and now we have hundreds of students participating in them. How do we make sure that those college and career transition clubs are visiting our programs and understanding what those opportunities are at each institution so that we make good matches? Again, figuring out the relationship between a credential versus an industry certification and meeting industry needs. Do we need to better align those? Are we developing the occupational skills that are in demand in the workplace? If we're not, then we're not going to increase our employment outcomes and our program effectiveness. We have to think about all of student skills, again, their employment, their social skills, and their self-determination skills, because these are skills that are important in the workplace. And how does our curriculum address those or prepare students for those? And how are we measuring those learning outcomes, which we've talked about numerous times? Defining the learning outcomes and then measuring them. Paid work experience via the curriculum. Are we doing that? Is that done enough? So that, again, we understand the paid work experience is an important indicator of post-school success. Are we providing that through our curriculum? So that we're preparing students for that transition to employment. Transportation, I haven't heard from people, but I clearly wonder if transportation remains an impediment to post-program employment. One of my original professional experiences was the superintendent of administrative affairs for the regional transit system in Gainesville. And I was in that position for many years. And, you know, one of the things that we did under my leadership was reach out to the disability community. So we could teach people who were in sheltered workshops in other group homes that we don't even have anymore, right? How to ride the bus so that they could become independent in their community. They could access employment, they could access leisure time, go to the movies, go to the mall, be with their friends. We have to teach those skills, but we also have to make sure that that infrastructure is there for our students to access. Or teach them how to access transportation if we don't have accessible public transportation in our community. And then thinking about adequate staff time for employment support. So when I looked across the staffing roles reported by all the programs, only 8% of staff time is focused on employment support. So I know the administrative demands and the instructional demands are heavy, but thinking back to how UCF and Santa Fe had to sort of consider this need as important for their program success, others might need to think about that and shifting time as well. More questions, you know, how do we expand our capacity to serve a greater number of students, a more ethnically diverse student body? And what I hear again from families and educators is how do we serve a more diverse group of students with intellectual disabilities? So it appears that some of our programs serve only the top tier of students. Now, again, we need to make good matches between students' goals, students' abilities, students' needs, and the program that they choose to make sure that we're providing adequate supports and good matches there. But at the same time, can we reach deeper into our community of students with intellectual disability so that we're serving a broader range of abilities? And of course, how do we work more effectively with parents, K-12 educators, agency staff? If we were here in person, I would ask you so many questions about, okay, who's become a VR vendor? Who's doing pre-employment transition skills in their university through the pre-ETS program with VR? and et cetera, et cetera. Who has independent living skills centers engaged with their programs? I know they were working with that down in Southwest Florida. But that's also a fundamental key in partnership. How do we improve our curricula to ensure that students gain those specific skills associated with success? Occupational skills, but self-determination and social skills. And we have to look certainly through coursework, the courses that we develop and students are taking, but who's providing the instruction and the quality of that instruction, and then the access to technology and how students are using technology as a way to apply these skills both within on campus and then in the community. And how do we better, or how do we meet the needs of business and industry so our students gain employment? I think that's always going to be a question. Do we better align our credentials with industry standards and or industry certifications? And again, that's an important research question, I think, because as I looked across all the data, I just had I saw so many things when I thought about employment. And I'm trying to flip back to my notes because I just had all these questions about, industry cert, paperwork, integration. I don't know. How do we get then? So what I want to know is, what are your program characteristics and what is the association with student completion and employment and the relationship with industry standards? How do we effectively use our evaluation data to help answer these questions? And I'm never going to leave that alone. And how effectively do we engage in the planning process to either develop and or improve or expand our programs? So those are two fundamental things that we do through this institute and that we've been doing for 5 years. And so I think we can never relax about using our continuous improvement process. And that means planning, evaluating, and making decisions, just like the flow chart showed. So, it's hard. It's hard. Only a few people like Alicia and June and me enjoy it. Other than that, some of you do, but I know it's hard. So, but the key is it's what leads to our success. So 1 is the planning and developing good plans, and 2 is using our data that we collect to improve what we're doing. So when you think about all the resources that are available through this institute and through the center, then we have several folks from FAU, from Santa Fe. Who else? That's presenting sessions on lessons learned. And McFadder. So, what have we learned? We've been doing this for 5 years. Here are some things we can share with you that could be certainly a resource as you plan either program development or improvement. Community resources. So we're going to talk about some of those things that are available through the state. So how do we access statewide resources that can help support our students or help support our curriculum, really? Effective planning. So Alicia is going to do a session on technical soundness of your plans. I know, because I looked through them again and I'm thinking about the outcomes that people are doing, and I'm going, well, that's an activity. That is not an outcome. And you've heard me say this over and over again, and I won't ever let it die. So if you're still struggling with understanding the difference between those, please listen to Alicia's session on technical soundness of your plans, because we have over numerous years looked at state plans, capacity building plans, local district plans, and post-secondary education plans. And what we found is that a certain level of technical soundness of your plans leads to goal achievement. So if you have a good sound plan, you're much more likely then to achieve your goals that you've established for your program. Evaluation is a fundamental part of that. And again, June Gothberg is recognized as an evaluation expert in the country. And she's going to be doing certainly talking more about evaluation for you. And then engaging faculty. I think Mary Lou is doing a session on faculty and working with faculty. It's Mary Lou, right? And then a whole workshop on peer mentoring. And I know that we've looked at and we've supported program directors to go work with folks peer mentoring through the National Reading College Reading Association and Learning Association. And so we've seen now many of you programs have adopted their peer mentoring model, and you have an opportunity for the post-institute workshop to look at how to become a certified peer mentoring program. And then you also have hours of planning time with a facilitator, like Janice says. So these facilitators are phenomenal, and they've facilitated at the national and state level. They understand evidence-based and promising practices, and they're real familiar with your planning tool. So use them specifically as a resource, and take advantage of the planning time that you have with them. Sort of look at this as you've taken a brief sabbatical away from your everyday work, and you get to spend time planning, talking about this stuff. So, do I have any time for questions? No. I'm over.
They want to know if the PowerPoint is going to be available, so.
Yes, the
they are
PowerPoint
hanging
will
on.
be available.
They are hanging on.
My daughter says she spent too much time on PowerPoint stuff. Nobody cares about that on Cassie. There will be some people who will want this because they'll need to show it at their institutions. So anyway, I hope it does stimulate some thinking and stimulate some pats on the back, because you guys have done amazing, amazing work. And I really want to thank you for the honor of serving with you. These peers, all of these people that are out there leading these programs, this staff, you're passionate, you're intelligent, you're pragmatic, you're persistent, and you're persistent because you're patient. And patience has nothing to do for working with students with disabilities. I get so tired of people saying, oh, you must be a patient person if you're working on the disability. No, I'm not. But I do have to be patient in moving development of these programs forward. So you are patient with your institutions as you teach them what this is all about. And you're persistent with them in moving forward and establishing these. And I really thank you for the honor of speaking with you today. Thank you for inviting me. I'm so excited. And I'm so proud of my staff. So give my staff a really big hand. And I'm really proud of you all. So welcome new folks, and thank you persistent folks for continuing your really good and hard work.
Awesome.
I'm sorry.
Awesome.
That was absolutely amazing. Thank you, Paula.
No, my pleasure.
There is a lot of good work out there. We have our colleagues hanging on. We're going to beg you, before you go, if you don't go too soon, if you mind turning your cameras on, so we can do a quick screenshot of everyone's here as evidence before we all leave. And smile to the camera, so we can have beautiful pictures that we can share with the rest of the world.
Yay.
Thank you so much. Team is snapping away, taking screenshots, showing evidence of who's here. So we really appreciate you turning your cameras on. We're going to have a great time at the Institute. Thank you for hanging in there with us. We got a lot to be proud of, lots of pride. And we're looking forward to our speakers and the rest of the session. Be safe, everybody.